What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to Talkin. I am your host, as always, Steven Zamora. You can follow me on Twitter at ZamoraBSD. That would be the best place for any and all show updates. And if you clicked on that link, you know what time it is. You know what we're here for. We're doing an off-season preview of the Milwaukee Bucks and one of the best players in the world, Giannis Antetokounmpo. If you are one of my subscribers, you know how we do this already. But if you are new here, this is how we're going to break this thing down. I'm going to go over the weaknesses that the Bucks need to improve on. We're going to go over the tools that you have at your disposal to get better. We're going to come up with a checklist of must-dos that John Horst and that front office must take care of before going any further. Then we're going to get into some trade options, the draft, free agency, all that fun stuff. And all that will lead up to a nice 10-man rotation that we can be really excited about heading into the next season. So if you like this kind of content, I'm going to be doing one of these previews for every team before the draft in a few weeks. Happy Father's Day. I appreciate you for checking this out. Now let's get into it, the Milwaukee Bucks. So first things first, in order to understand what the Bucks actually need to be better at, let's look at some statistical weaknesses that they had last season. They were 4th in the league in points per game, 21st in points allowed per game, 28th in fast break points, 25th in points in the paint per game, 21st in field goals allowed per game, 27th in field goal attempts per game, and 25th in offensive rebounding per game. So anybody who's been keeping up with the Bucks and in the NBA in general has probably heard the narrative by now that the Bucks traded all their defense for offense this year. And it kind of seems so. 21st in defense and 4th in offense, basically. But a big factor towards the defense being that bad was all the points in the paint that were allowed by the Bucks last year. With a front court of Giannis Antetokounmpo and Brook Lopez, that's kind of inexcusable. But I will say that a lot of that had to do with paint penetration by guards. Just didn't have a very good perimeter defense last year in Milwaukee. And then people who really watch this team understand that this team needs to get some youth, needs to get some athletic juice on this roster. So we're going to go ahead and look for some of that in this preview as well. Luckily, there are ways to improve this team, including the 23rd overall pick in the NBA draft, 33rd overall pick in the second round, Brook Lopez, Pat Connaughton, and Marjon Beauchamp contracts for salary matching, over $180 million in committed salaries for 24-25, well above the tax line. You owe your 25, 27, and 29 picks to other teams, while 26, 28, and 2030 are swaps or protected. So now that we have a basic understanding of where Milwaukee was deficient at and some tools that they have to address those deficiencies, let's come up with a checklist that John Horst and that front office must address before we go any further. So a big question that's going to need to be asked in that front office is this time to retool this roster? If I was in the front office and I was a part of those meetings, I would tell them, no, let's play patience, right? Dame just came to the Bucks. An example I like to use frequently throughout these offseason previews is look at the Minnesota Timberwolves last year. They made a big move for Rudy Gobert, and it really didn't pay off until year 2. And this year, they were one of the best teams in the West, ended up making it to the Western Conference Finals based on how good their defense was and the improvement because they had a guy like Rudy Gobert. Just give the Bucks another year to mesh and learn that chemistry. Another big thing was Dame came in out of shape. Doc Rivers had talked about it on Bill Simmons' podcast about Dame came in and he just wasn't 100% throughout the season because he came into camp out of shape because of the trade and everything. He wasn't working out super hard and he just really never caught up throughout the season. I think it's just fair to give these guys another chance, to learn how to play with each other and, come together and see if they can really win before we really start tweaking major things on this roster. So with that said, I think what we're going to try to aim for here is just adding some athleticism, adding some youth, and seeing if the guys that are already on the team, the young guys, can continue developing and, bring some of that depth that Milwaukee really needed last year. So in the spirit of that, I came up with the trade, okay? And it's what it is it's going to get rid of one of the older players on the team, and he's a beloved member of the Bucks, but I think a little bit of change is in order here. So in this trade, we're sending Bobby Portis to the Indiana Pacers, and Milwaukee will be getting Benedict Mathurin from Indiana. So the reason Indiana does this is they had to sign James Jones middle of the season last year just because it felt like they really didn't have any toughness to them. They didn't have anybody in the locker room who was really going to make these guys, play hard on defense and just stick to the culture and everything. And I think it really paid off, right? Indiana ended up making it into the Eastern Conference Finals. For lack of a better word, they need an asshole on the team, right? And Bobby Portis is that tough guy. He's that attitude. He's going to light a fire under these young guys and keep them to a higher standard, right? He's a champion. He brings some championship medal to that team. And I think that would just really benefit Indiana a ton to have a guy like that. He also fits in schematically, especially in the half court where Indiana's offense is really good. It was legit number one last year in the NBA. I think if you add Bobby Portis to it as well, because chances are you're going to lose Jalen Smith, Bobby Portis can be, a replacement and an upgrade at that spot. For Milwaukee, like I said, you get a young piece who former top 10 pick. He can come in off the bench and just light it up for you guys. I think he just fits in Milwaukee's system a lot better because really what they need is somebody who can come off the bench and just add a ton of points and scoring and, ball control and stuff like that. And I think that's Benedict Mathurin's game. I think he just doesn't fit too well in Indiana with the way that they run their team. So I think this would just really benefit his career a lot, but also come to a team where he can be himself and he can play his style of play for a team who would be really grateful for that type of play. And eventually, maybe he can even take over the Chris Middleton spot. Once Middleton gets a little bit older, he can kind of bring a lot of the same things that Middleton brings. I think you can also play him at the 2. So if you end up striking out in free agency, you can bring him off the bench and put him at the starting 2 guard, and he could play in between Chris and Dame. So now that we got the trade out of the way, let's start looking at some draft options, all right? So the Bucks have the 23rd pick in the NBA draft. On your left is going to be a big board provided by CBS. On your right is a big board provided by Tankathon. And in the middle is going to be a big board provided by The Ringer. And I was listening to a podcast earlier this week by Sam Vecini. So shout out Sam Vecini. But he was talking about the sweet spot in this draft is like between 8 and 18. And in my opinion, it really is 8 through like 23. I think that is the sweet spot. There's always going to be a reach as well. So I think you guys are going to have a pretty good choice of that, of that tier of players. So as you can see on the comps for The Ringer, there's not a lot of guys on there who have become like superstars, all-stars, or anything like that. They're all projected to be really good role players, right? My favorite way it was described was by John Wasserman on the Hardwood Knocks podcast. Problem with this draft is it's tougher to identify who the stars are going to be. So I think that's the best way to go about, thinking about this draft. A couple guys I think would be really good for Milwaukee at that 23rd spot. Maybe Terrence Shannon Jr. You guys were one of the league's worst fast break teams. Terrence Shannon Jr. is probably the best transition player in the entire NCAA last year. For a good understanding of how big of an impact he was in transition, I heard somebody say there were 3 guarantees in the NCAA last year. Zach Edey post-up, Dan Hurley outsmarting you, and Terrence Shannon in transition. I think this might be a little too high for Terrence Shannon Jr., but I could also see him being a good fit here. Another guy I think would be a good fit is DeRon Holmes, right? He's a big who could stretch the floor, play some 4, maybe play some 5. He's a little bit undersized, but I think he would be a really good fit. Milwaukee could always use some more stretch bigs, especially now that we traded Bobby Portis away, right? We're going to need that depth behind Brook Lopez and Giannis, and maybe even find somebody who could take over that Brook Lopez 5 spot in the future. But with that in mind, I think DeRon Holmes isn't the answer there. So in my opinion, I think with that 23rd overall pick and somebody who I'm pretty sure is going to be there for you guys is Kyle Filipowski out of Duke University. So Filipowski is a 7-foot, 230-pound big man out of Duke. He averaged 16 points, almost 3 assists, and 8.5 rebounds a game. 50% from the field, 35% from 3, 67% from the line. This guy was one of the best offensive players in all of college basketball last year. He is a big who can handle the ball, handle DHOs. He's a really good glue guy. He's a really good passer for the position. He has really good touch. And on top of that, he's intense. He's a dog. He gets after it, right? He's a very competitive guy. He's big as hell. I think he just brings a lot of the things that Milwaukee is looking for. Now, some of the negatives, right? He's a bit of a defensive liability. He's a little slow on his feet laterally, but a lot of big guys are going to be. He doesn't have a lot of explosiveness. He's not a real powerful guy. He's not the most athletic guy in terms of strength or quickness or anything like that. He just doesn't have a lot of like the physical attributes that you would really want. But I think just the way he is so good offensively that he just brings a lot of what Bobby Portis did, and I'm going to be on a much cheaper contract. So we got our trade out of the way. We've taken care of the draft. So one more big piece we got to address before we go further, and that is free agency. So Milwaukee has Thanasis, Beasley, Pat Bev, Jay Crowder, and Gallo all hitting free agency this year. Now, with the exchange of Benedict Mathurin for Bobby Portis, the Bucks are going to be saving $5.3 million, and that is going to help us duck under that second apron allowing Milwaukee to earn that taxpayer mid-level exception. Now, we do have some holes that we need to address. With Pat Bev, Crowder, and Beasley specifically hitting free agency, we got some holes in the backup areas, and we need a starting two guard. Now, what we need to do is find a guard who can complement Damian Lillard well, and that means we need to find somebody who is a legit defender. So a couple names I have in mind: Gary Harris, DeAnthony Melton, Josh Okogie, Chris Dunn, Josh Richardson, Kyle Lowry, Spencer Dinwiddie, DeLon Wright, Killian Hayes. Okay, so let's talk them bottom four first, right? Those are going to be more your backup ones, right? Got Damian Lillard. I think it'd be smart to bring in another, point of attack defender as that backup one. You got guys like Killian Hayes and DeLon Wright. I think DeLon Wright would be perfect. He's not old to where he's going to be a little bit of a liability. Kyle Lowry is a little older, better at setting up the offense and stuff like that. But I think just DeLon Wright is, you want to add some more athleticism. You don't want to add more age. Killian Hayes, he's a younger guy, but he's also a liability on offense. And then there's Spencer Dinwiddie, who's kind of the opposite. He's a really big, long, in theory, defender, but he's just not as good as a defender, and he's more of an offensive player as it is anyway. I think he'd be a really good fit too, just if you want some more juice off the bench. But I think for this one, I'm going to go with DeLon Wright as the backup point guard. Now for the two guards, we got Gary Harris, Melton, Okogie, and Dunn. I think a good target here would be Okogie. I think Okogie is out of all these guys, he is, I think, on another level defensively. I think he is one of the better guard defenders in the entire league. And he can hit his open threes when they're open. He's a good enough shooter. I think it's going to be okay. Then let's look at some wings, just in case, you strike out on some of those guards and you have to end up moving Mathurin to your two. Haywood Highsmith and Cam Reddish. I think either one of these guys could be really good in that backup role. Haywood Highsmith is a dog. He's learning how to shoot better, but he's a really smart player. He knows how to cut well. I think there's always a place for a guy like Haywood Highsmith on a team. Cam Reddish, he's more of like your real talented guy who's kind of never worked out. Might be worth a shot bringing him in. He did a pretty good job defensively last year for the Lakers, but, I think he just needs some more seasoning. So you draft Kyle Filipowski, but between him and Brook and Giannis, I think it'd be smart to bring in another forward just to have, some versatility and some more depth for the big men. You got Obi Toppin, Kevin Love, Trendon Watford, Jay Crowder, and Jeff Green. Obi, I don't think you'll be able to afford. I'm pretty sure he'll be able to at least get a taxpayer mid-level exception. We'll see, though. He might be one of those guys that's like left after free agency and just didn't end up getting a deal. So if you can get him, I think that would be a steal. Like Josh Richardson is the only guy left there, and Obi Toppin is still available, and you can go and get him, and he'd be willing to accept your deal. I think it'd be smarter to prioritize Obi Toppin. That's how good I think he would be for this team. Kevin Love, I don't think he's going to leave Miami, but it's worth a shot. Trendon Watford, he's a younger kid hitting free agency. I think he's got a ton of potential, and I think you can sneak away with a guy like Trendon Watford and be really happy about it later on in the season when he ends up becoming like your seventh or eighth guy. Jay Crowder and Jeff Green. Jeff Green's an older guy, but he'll bring some athleticism. Me personally, I think Jay Crowder was a pretty good fit here. I think he fills his role correctly. I think he knows what he's doing. He's not too old yet. So I think another year or two on a vet minimum, I think would be perfect for this team. So if that's the case and we go and get DeLon Wright on a vet minimum, we sign Jay Crowder on another vet minimum, and then we use our MLE on Josh Okogie. I think those are three crucial signings that would definitely help Milwaukee and have our rotation looking really good here. Damian Lillard backed up by DeLon Wright, Josh Okogie backed up by AJ Green, Chris Middleton backed up by Benedict Mathurin, Giannis Antetokounmpo backed up by Jay Crowder, Brook Lopez backed up by Kyle Filipowski. Now I want to discuss real quick that backup two guard position. I personally was very impressed by AJ Green last year and the few times that I've seen him play. I think he brings a lot of what you're losing with Malik Beasley. I think he just brings a change of pace. A big theme for this roster in total is, versatility and being able to blend and mold with new game plans and schemes, right? If there's a team out there where you need a real good shooter, you got a guy like AJ Green, you got a guy like Chris Middleton, and you got, of course, Damian Lillard. If you need somebody who's more of a veteran or, better at defense, then you still have Connaughton on the team. So I think, you could play either one of those as your backup, but I think AJ Green so far has been better. Then I also want to talk about the insane versatility of your front court. You got a giant in Brook Lopez, right, who's one of the best post defenders in the league. You got Filipowski, who is, as far as college-wise, was an offensive savant and would be a really good fit, very similar to Kelly Olynyk. You have Giannis Antetokounmpo, who's obviously one of the best players in the entire world, Defensive Player of the Year caliber defender. Can switch 1 through 5 at one of the best in the NBA. And then Jay Crowder, who's your standard 3-and-D guy, who's going to go out there, who's going to get his open looks and hit them and defend the other guy on the bench really well. So a bunch of versatility there. And the most important thing, I feel like you guys just have a bunch of perimeter defense now. You have, of course, Josh Okogie, who's going to complement Dame really well. You've got DeLon Wright, who's a very good defender in his own right. And you also have Benedict Mathurin, but he has all the athletic tools and everything. He's going to be a real good mismatch on certain players. You add a ton of really good perimeter defense on this team, I think it's going to go a long way towards improving that defense. Now, if you disagree with anything that I said, I'm totally open to hearing all criticisms. Let me know down in the comments. It'll go a long way to helping me get better for future offseason previews. If you do like this, though, like and subscribe to the channel. Like I said, I'm going to be doing one of these for every team in the future until the NBA draft. So let me know. I'm also planning on coming out and putting out my big board on Twitter. So if you don't follow me on Twitter so you can check out my big board, I've been looking into the draft quite a bit. I'm not nearly as good as a lot of these scouts and guys who do this a lot more frequently than me. But I do have a pretty good hold on at least the first 30 players of the NBA draft. It's worth a look. Check it out. I'll have it on my Twitter here very soon. Also, I'm going to be on the What's in a Game podcast with the homies Will and Grace in the very near future. So make sure you check out those guys as well. And I hope everybody has a wonderful day. All right. Happy Father's Day. I love you guys. Talking BS. We out.